It's December. You're in your home, staying inside from the harsh, bitter cold. You're watching television or preparing for the holiday season or sipping on tea. It's quiet. But then suddenly, it's not. You hear a crowd of people begin to approach your front door. You can hear what sounds like the jangling of keys, boots stomping in the snow. You weren't expecting company. You rush to the door to see what's happening outside, but they're already at your door. Through your window, you see them. A group of people outside, all with their faces covered. Some are wearing white sheets with eyes drawn on. Some have hats over their faces. Some are wearing balaclavas. Some are wielding big sticks with things like bottle caps and nails sticking out of them. One of them seems to be mounting some sort of fake wooden horse. For clothes, they are covered head to toe. Some don flannel jackets, some with multiple layers of hoodies and shirts. Some are wearing bras and underwear outside their clothes. But perhaps the strangest thing of all is that you cannot identify a single one of them. You begin to fumble with the door, but it's too late. They're now on your doorstep. And before you can even react, a large gloved hand bangs on the door. Without waiting, the same hand grabs the door handle and flings the door open. These people enter your home. There's nothing you can do about it. And they will stay here until they're ready to go. If what I just described to you sounds like a scene from a gory horror movie, well, it's not. This is called mummering, or jannying, or something else entirely depending on where you're from. As strange as it sounds, mummering is a holiday tradition in some regions of the United Kingdom, Canada, and even in the US. This tradition dates back to the 1800s and possibly even before then, and involves dressing up in a silly disguise and visiting various people in the community. Mummers would go to house and essentially party. They would dance with people in the house, play and sing music, and well, get blackout drunk. Mummers would be anybody in the community, not just family or friends of the host, but often random people within the community that were strangers, just to come in and join the fun. The reason for the disguise was that mummering was like a game. As people came into the home, the host was supposed to guess who was wearing the various disguises based on their mannerisms and such. Many mummers would speak in a variety of strange ways, such as yelling or using aggressive speech, which is speaking while inhaling. This idea clearly comes from a different time in human history. The idea of random people coming into your home and talking in strange voices is now the story of many modern horror tales, rather than a charming and fun holiday tradition. In Atlantic, Canada, there's even a popular song about mummering, which has become a staple of Christmas traditions.
What's the noise out by the porch door? Granny, 'tis mummers, there's 20 or more.
Mummering has become one of the most marketable things about Newfoundland, Canada, the place where it's most popular. Numerous Christmas decorations, paintings, mugs, clothing depict these mummer characters and harken back to a time when people could just go door to door, eat and drink and be merry without the consequences. The mummer is a symbol of the province, which represents its friendliness, its folksy roots, its relationship to music and food and merriment, all things which bring people to the province still today. Each year, the city of St. John's holds a mummering parade, in which mummers fill the streets with dancing and music, celebrating the long-held tradition. However, this wasn't the case for a long time. In fact, there was a long period of time in the province when mummering was a topic to be avoided. As you can imagine by the title of this video, mummering has its dark spots as well. Growing up, I had heard about the mummering murder. When I was a young kid, like 4 or 5, I was terrified of mummers. The idea of them haunted me even outside of the Christmas season. As I grew older, I became less afraid and more disturbed by the story. How could someone take a holiday tradition so well loved that was supposed to be fun and wholesome and desecrate it? Well, as it turns out, the answer to that question would be a lot harder to find than I thought. It was only in my adult years that I started to think about the story again. This mummer murder that I heard so much about as a kid. When did it happen? Where? How? I decided to find out, only to discover something that I'm very glad I didn't find out as a kid. This murder happened in my hometown, somewhere that now I live within driving distance of. So with that information in mind, I knew what I had to do. I'm currently trying to find the grave of Isaac Mercer. The specific site of the grave has not been well documented. There are multiple Isaac Mercers in graveyards around the area of this murder. The only confirmation that I really have that his grave is indeed somewhere nearby is this post on findagrave.com, which states that there's an Isaac Mercer who died in 1860 somewhere here. There are no pictures, no description, no real way to know. After checking out the graveyard myself, I was able to find multiple other Isaac Mercers, but not this one. In a small community such as this in Atlantic Canada, it's very unlikely that there are archives dating back to 1860. I may have to go deeper. Just like the actual murder case itself, there are a lot of unknowns. What we do know? We know from a very dedicated but short pool of researchers and historians, such as Dale Jarvis, who wrote about this and interviewed other historians, or like Joy Frazier, who clawed through local archives, notes, and reports in order to try and piece this together. Her contributions to the story have been immeasurable, but unfortunately, many details will remain masked, like the men who attacked Isaac Mercer on the night of December 28th, 1860. Here's what we do know. Isaac Mercer was 29 years old. He was Anglican, he was a fisherman, and he'd been married shortly before the murder. During the day of December 28, 1860, Mercer had been in the woods, possibly gathering firewood or clearing brush for the remainder of the cold, unforgiving Canadian winter. He had a hatchet with him. He was with his two brothers-in-law, Abraham Russell and John Brown. After a hard day's work, the men decided to stop into Brown's house for a quote-unquote cup of tea. As historian Mike Flynn put it in an interview, I don't think it was tea they were drinking. They referred to having a few drinks out of a noggin, a flask, basically. He laid the hatchet outside, went inside, and the boys had a few drinks. Records show that when it was time to leave, Mercer didn't want to go alone. In a sad case of irony, or perhaps just clear foresight, he was scared of being harmed by the mummers. This seems like a good time to bring up some research that Joy Frazier had done, surrounding not only this case, but mummering in general. The Isaac Mercer case was a local nightmare, turned into legend. A sensation that all corners of the province and beyond had heard about or seemed to know about. However, while looking into more information about the case, Frazier discovered something interesting but disturbing. She discovered numerous other cases of criminal violence involving mummers. In her paper, Frazier states that these findings were interesting. In particular, the documents she found leading up to and after the Isaac Mercer case. She says, "They contain a wealth of information about the practice of mumming in the area during this period, and offer insights into the wider attitudes and tensions encoded in the violence surrounding the custom, and in the responses of authorities." Clearly, Mercer had heard tales of violent mummers taking advantage of the tradition to provide anonymity and get away with crimes, and that night, he didn't want to take any chances. He grabbed his hatchet on the way out the door, and together, the men started to walk. Mercer was right to get his brothers-in-law to accompany him, but unfortunately, this wouldn't be enough, nor would the hatchet he wielded. Details of the actual murder are slim. We know that the boys approached Mercer's home on Wilcox Lane, and it was there they ran into 5, maybe 6 mummers. We know some sort of altercation took place. We know that Mercer's own hatchet was either ripped from his hands or he dropped it, and that he was attacked with it. And we know that after being attacked, he did in fact make it back home. However, he wouldn't make it through the night. By that morning, December 29th, 1860, Isaac Mercer will be dead. While scrolling Find a Grave, I noticed that some of the entries contain the names of people who submitted the gravesites to be archived. I scroll down on the entry for Isaac Mercer that's on the website, and there are some names. I send them an email, asking if they know anything about the gravesite. They get back to me and tell me that they're from Tennessee, and they were just helping a lady from Newfoundland add records to the website. I asked them if they remember the name of the lady who they were helping. They do not. That's a dead end. I have visited the graveyard where I believe him to be buried multiple times. It's unkempt. Multiple gravestones are tipped over and grown over. The final remnants of ancestors victim to the unrelenting force of time meets nature. Maybe one of these tipped over memorials or unmarked rocks is where his body lies. Maybe I've walked over him multiple times. Reactions to the murder of Isaac Mercer were strong. Stronger than ever before during the previous instances of mummer violence. People wanted justice. They wanted to feel safe again. They wanted to be able to enjoy the traditions again. To put it simply, people wanted change. The trial of Isaac Mercer is expectedly blurry and, unfortunately, anticlimactic. While the group of men were brought to trial, the supposed leader of the group was a man named John Dawson. Motives for the murder are all speculative and unconfirmed. However, one prevailing theory seems to be based on religious difference. The men who attacked Mercer were all Catholic, while Mercer was Anglican. Some important context to this is that during the time in Newfoundland, people were very divided by religion. So much so that schools were all delegated by religions. A separate school for Protestants, Catholics, and the like. So while it seems strange to think that a murder could be based on religious difference alone, this would track for ideas of religion at the time. While the men were identified, the nature of the crime, the mumming outfits, the lack of trustworthy witnesses, made for a complicated trial and mostly one-sided case. The case became less about understanding the motive of an altercation and more about deciding how to charge the mummers in question. As Robert Hiscock points out in an article on his website, Product of Newfoundland, on November 20th, 1861, an indictment was laid before the grand jury. Chief Justice Sir Francis Brady instructed them that they must determine whether the mummers had been lying in wait for Mercer or had just happened to cross him. The distinction being the difference between murder and manslaughter. On November 27th, it was decided that the distinction could not be made beyond reasonable doubt, and the trial ended there. None of the mummers were charged or held responsible for the murder of Isaac Mercer. While there had been other violent mummering cases, the spread and attention of this one, along with the lack of a conclusion, only led to further dissatisfaction with mummering in the province. Now there'd been a precedent. Mummers could murder and get away with it. In 1861, the tensions between civilians and mummers would come to a head, and the Legislative Council would debate on what to do about the mummering situation. In any case, it was clear that something had to be done. Then in June, something was. To quote the website Community Stories, on June 25, 1861, an act to make further provision for the prevention of nuisances was passed. It dictated that any person who shall be found at any season of the year without a written license from a magistrate, dressed as a mummer, masked, or otherwise disguised, shall be deemed guilty of a public nuisance. This felt like a step in the right direction, and there was a collective sigh of relief from the province. However, the plan was decidedly short-sighted, as throughout the following year, mummering violence continued. Yes, mummers can now get charged for being a public disturbance and not having a license, but this wasn't enough of a deterrent. People were still being attacked. Mummers were still causing chaos and harming innocent people. It was decided that these measures were not enough, and on March 27th, 1862, mummering was made illegal in Newfoundland. It remained this way for 100 years. This may have been great news for the province, but for the friends and family of Isaac Mercer, it was already much too late. The damage had been done. Isaac, 29 years old, was dead, and the people who killed him were walking free. Fraser describes a witness testament that she found from Mercer's widow.
He was married just a couple of weeks before the incident. But one of the things that kind of made me cry a wee bit when I found it was a witness statement, a transcript of a witness statement made by his widow just a few days afterwards, and talking about how she couldn't, I think she talks about how she couldn't actually go into the room where he died because it was just too hard for her.
Stories like this are sadly not uncommon. Legislation is often written in blood. Throughout history, there have been countless examples of situations in which governmental change was only instituted after an extreme disturbance, and sometimes after some people pay the ultimate price. While mummering violence did continue after the Mercer case, it's no secret that the case was a driving force for change. But in the process, what did people lose? They lost their sense of comfort in their communities. They lost their connection to their own culture, as they were outlawed from engaging in traditions that their forefathers had. Family and friends of Isaac Mercer lost somebody that they loved. They had lost a part of themselves when he died. And Mercer himself? Well, he lost his life. Maybe that's why finding his burial site has become so important to me. This gravesite is one thing in a long line of details about his tragic story that's become lost. There have already been multiple injustices in his story, and this just feels like another. And when we lose the grave, this one remaining physical attribute of his, will we lose him? Will we lose his story? Will we forget that part of our history? In the process of trying to find out more about Mercer, about his life and his death, I began looking into where the murder took place, Wilcox Lane, very close to his home. The lane no longer exists. I came across this picture. This is Mike Flynn, who I mentioned earlier, standing in front of the gate that once stood in front of Mercer's house, the gate outside of which he'd been attacked. Mike Flynn is posing with the gate. He must know where it is. I decided that I should reach out to him, that maybe he'd be willing to share his knowledge of the story, but I was very saddened to learn that Mike Flynn passed away in 2023. He was a community leader, a coach, a tutorer, and a beacon of knowledge of history. His kindness and storytelling abilities will be missed by all who knew him. I only wish I had the chance to hear his stories myself. Then I thought that maybe Frasier would help me, that she'd be willing to share her insights. She had done so much research, and I knew she'd be such a help for this video. Once again, I was heartbroken to learn that Frasier had passed away in 2023. She left behind invaluable research and many colleagues, friends, and family who love her. And just like she was teary-eyed while listening to Mercer's wife's testimony, I became teary-eyed, reading people's nice messages about her. But this made me come to a realization, why the work that Frasier and Flynn and people like them do is so important. It lives on after they're gone. The cycle of history and storytelling. This is the essence of why we share stories. Stories that impact us and guide our culture. They are important. This is important. I began Googling and looking at maps. Nowhere is this gate mentioned as a memorial, historical site, or anything. Worse yet, in the description of the photo, the author mentions that the gate is now on private property. I began to look at the image. I try to visualize areas of this place that I've driven around, trying to think about where it could be. Just like my multiple trips to the graveyard, I began driving around, slowly scoping out various side streets, older places in town, historical buildings, and streets. Then, on a whim, I decided to message an old friend of mine. Somebody who's worked for the town before, who knows this place, knows its history. Soon after, he sends me a map, pointing out the exact location of the gate. The good news is that now I know exactly where it is. The bad news? We were right. The gate is indeed on private property. Well, I guess there's only one thing left to do. This is it. This is the place where Isaac Mercer was attacked. Finding it was a community effort. Mike Flynn, for first leading Jarvis to it for his blog, showing me that it even existed. My friend who was able to tell me where it was exactly. And the man whose property it was on, who graciously let me visit the site, and excitedly told me the story of Isaac Mercer while I was there. Through these people, Mercer will live on. They will allow a story to be remembered. The fact that the old gate still stands there, where Wilcox Lane does not, is a testament to that. So, I found the gate. This might be the closest I get to Isaac Mercer. Today, the stigma of mummering is more or less faded from the collective consciousness of the province. People still mummer. It's become a commodity, a symbol of simpler times, of sharing a drink and a song. There's a charm to the tradition for sure. It feels like a way to connect to the past, to no technology and no worries. But as we grow further and further away from the stigma of mummering, we also bury the past deeper and deeper. We forget why we ever felt that there was a dark side to mummering. We do a disservice to people like Isaac Mercer, to his friends and family, to the multiple other victims affected by the tradition. And then, we lose them. We lose the important work of people like Frasier or Flynn or Jarvis. We lose touch with our culture. We lose graves. However, all is not lost. While it's up to us to recognize our past, its good and bad, it's up to us to make new traditions as well. To find new ways to remember.